Good to be with you. I was looking up something today, and I have hardcover copy and paperback copies of Sir Harold Nicolson's wartime diaries, which are absolutely extraordinary. But the hardcover and the paper are divided differently, and it's interesting. The hardcover, the section picks up at 1939, uh, and therefore misses the Munich Agreement, which is in the one I have from 1930 to 1964. So I'm going to read from that tonight. He, of course, Sir Harold Nicolson was a member of Parliament and became a diplomat, a famed literary figure. His diary is considered really one of the great human documents of the 20th century. And Churchill wartime cabinet, married to Vida Sackville-West. I'm just going to read. So he describes Neville Chamberlain, then the British Prime Minister, in Parliament, explaining his talks with Hitler and Mussolini. He went on to describe his negotiations with the Czechs and the French, and to tell us how he felt it necessary himself to visit Herr Hitler as a last resort. When he said these words, as a last resort, he whipped off his pince-nez and looked up at the skylight with an expression of grim hope. He then described his visit to, I'm going to mispronounce this, but Berchtesgaden, Hitler's lair and retreat. It was, he said, with a wry grin, my first flight. And then he described the whole visit as this adventure. He said that his conversation with Hitler had convinced him that the Führer was prepared on behalf of the Sudeten Germans to risk world war. And then he said those words, as he said those words, a shudder of horror passed through the House of Commons. I came back, he added, to London the next day. The House was tense with excitement. He then told us how the Anglo-French plan was described by Hitler at Godesberg as too dilatory. Imagine, he said, the perplexity in which I found myself. This remark roused a murmur of sympathetic appreciation from all the benches. Yesterday morning, began the Prime Minister, and we were again conscious that some revelation was approaching. He began to tell us of the final appeal to Hitler and Mussolini. I glanced at the clock. It was 12 minutes after 4. The Prime Minister had been speaking for exactly an hour. I noticed that a sheet of Foreign Office paper was being rapidly passed along the government bench. Sir John Simon, no relation, alas, interrupted the Prime Minister, and there was a momentary hush. He adjusted his pince-nez and read the document that had been handed to him.
Pince-nez.
What?
No, sorry.
What?
I think it's a pince-nez.
Oh, did I say pince-nez? And
No, it's fine.
Little glasses. What is it again?
I don't know. Keep going.
All right, sorry. And read the document that had been handed to him. His whole face, his whole body seemed to change. He raised his face so that the light from the ceiling fell full upon it. All the lines of anxiety and weariness seemed suddenly to have been smoothed out. He appeared 10 years younger and triumphant. Herr Hitler, he said, has just agreed to postpone his mobilization for 24 hours and to meet me in conference with Signor Mussolini and Monsieur Daladier at Munich. That, I think, was one of the most dramatic moments which I've ever witnessed. For a second, the House was hushed in absolute silence. And then the whole House burst into a roar of cheering, since they knew that this might mean peace. That was the end of the Prime Minister's speech, and when he sat down, the whole House rose as a man to pay tribute to his achievement. I remained seated. Little behind me hissed, "Stand up, you brute." The papers are ecstatic about Chamberlain. Raymond Mortimer rings me up and says, "Isn't this ghastly? Eddie Sackville West rings me up and says, "Isn't this hell?" Margaret Oxford rings me up and says, "Now, Harold, you must agree that he is a great man." I say, "Not at all." "You are as bad as Violet Bonham Carter," she snaps. "He is the greatest Englishman that ever lived." It seems that my refusal to stand up yesterday, when all the rest of the house went hysterical, has made an impression. Everybody has heard of it. I was ashamed at the house yesterday. It seemed to me like a Welsh revivalist meeting. So far as I can see, Hitler gets everything he wants. Next day, he writes in his diary, "Wake up feeling wretched. Usually I wake up feeling life is worth living. Today, I wake up with iron in my soul." The terms as published seem to me to be little better than Godesberg, although one must wait to see the map before deciding. Violet Bonham Carter rings me up. She had been seeing Jan Mazarek, founder of Czechoslovakia. He told me that our minister in Prague had presented the Munich scheme to Venice and demanded an acceptance in 2 hours. Venice and the government will resign. So Hitler has achieved that. A terrible humiliation. Just later in his diary, "Wind and rain, finished my review and articles." The writer Frida Stark comes to dinner. She is anti-Chamberlain and thinks we should intervene in Spain at once. It is too late. Franco is almost within sight of Barcelona, and once he gets there, he will cut off communications with France and obtain the munition works of the Republicans. I fear it is all over there. Chamberlain announces that he's returning from Rome convinced of the good faith and the good intentions of the Italian government. How can he say such a thing at a moment when Italian troops are advancing on Barcelona? It is as bad as his peace with honor after Munich. Either he believes it, in which case he has no conceptions of the real proportion of the situation, or he does not believe it. How can he be so obstinate? Next day in his diary, he writes, "The tragedy of Europe seems to come close to us in ever diminishing circles." Little Giles, his 14-year-old nephew, chatters about Sir Humphrey Davies, for whom he has a passion. His sensitive face and his intelligence make me even more unhappy. What will that delightful boy have to create in the world, which will be his adult world? To me, it does not matter. I can just die. But he and his friends have got to live, and all the delicacy of a life will have gone. All the truthfulness, all the outspokenness, all the ease of life will have gone. They will never know. He lapses into French again. "I need your help." Le dossier de vivre?
La douceur de vivre.
Yes,
Yes, the sweetness of life.
the sweetness of life. Wow. Really, Chamberlain, another day he writes, "Really, Chamberlain is an astonishing and perplexing old boy. This afternoon, as you will have heard, he startled the house and the world by proclaiming something like an offensive and defensive alliance between us and France. Now, that is the very thing all of us have been pushing for, working for, writing for, speaking for all these months. What does all it mean? Is he really so ignorant of diplomacy as to assume that this means little? I cannot believe that. He spoke so resolutely and deliberately. This is a complete negation of his appeasement and Rome visit. He has, in fact, swung suddenly around to what we've all been asking for. What does it mean? I think it can only mean that he realizes that his appeasement has failed. It is at this stage that his value as a diplomat becomes an operative. No ordinary German or Italian will ever believe propaganda telling him that Chamberlain is a warmonger." This was an interesting section few months later, go to tea at the Russian embassy and find a strange collection of left-wing enthusiasts sitting around in the winter garden with huge tea tables spread, delicious cakes and caviar sandwiches, plus a samovar. The ambassador is, however, so interested in convincing them how right is the Soviet definition of indirect aggression that he forgets to offer them any tea, and they all go away casting forgetful glances at the untouched table. He says he believes that Chamberlain hopes to get a compromise on the Danzig question, and that if he does, he will allow the Anglo-Russian negotiations to lapse. We have a debate today about whether we should adjourn or not. I had hoped Anthony Eden was going to take a strong line, but he's now suggesting we should all toe the line. Winston refuses, and I cannot let the old lion enter the lobby alone. But apart from this, I do not feel very deeply that the House ought to adjourn. I regard it as a violation of the constitutional principle and an act of disrespect. Why is it that I am always in a minority? Am I wrong-headed? I simply don't know, writes Harold Nicolson. Or is it really that I am not trimmer by nature and hate discipline? I'm going to read one more section. You can see the cloud that's falling. All international train traffic has been stopped. All British ships have been told to leave Italian and German ports. Lights are to be, pages sticking together. Lights are to be extinguished in aerodromes. The pound is falling on the New York Exchange. The Europa has scuttled back to Europe. The Bremen is taking refuge in New York. Chamberlain rises immediately. He begins by saying the time has arrived when action rather than speech is required. Then, with some emotion, he reminds the House how he prayed that it would never fall upon him to ask the country to accept the awful arbitrament of war. I fear, he continued, that I may not be able to avoid that responsibility. He then goes on to say that we have neglected no means of making it crystal clear to the German government that if they use force, we should reply by force. And he raises his voice. At noon, we return to the chamber after an air raid warning. The speaker takes his seat with calm procedure. We have prayers. The prime minister makes a speech in which he is restrained. He looks very ill. Winston intervenes with a speech which misses fire since it is too like one of his articles. The sirens continue. We pay no attention to them. We learn afterwards the whole air raid was a mistake. But the effect of this alarm was that nobody really attuned to listen to with any real receptiveness. At 1:50, I motored down to Sissinghurst, that's his famous house. There are many lorries along the road and a few pathetic trucks evacuating East End refugees. One of those, there's an elderly woman who shakes her fist and shouts that it is all the fault of the rich. The Labour Party will be hard put to prevent this war degenerating into class warfare. When I reach Sissinghurst, I find the flag has been pulled down. So, wow, Sir Harold Nicolson's diaries. He was criticized for not standing and joining in the standing ovation, and history will judge him right. Has judged him right. Now I'm seeing something for a message here.
Oh, are you?
Let me see what that is. Oh, it's you. Welcome to Open Book.
Yeah, we still haven't figured out the chat.
All right.
We're talking to Riverside.
We're working on that. We're talking to Riverside. In the meantime, it's just good to be with everybody And thanks very much for being with us tonight on our open book. Take care. See you later. Bye-bye.
Here, do you want me to end it?
Yeah.